guys, we are here today to talk about the parts of the flower, and I have with me a nice large lily that will help us to see all of the parts. And I also have this Alstroemeria, which has a few parts that are a little bit clearer than on the lily. So we're going to be taking a look at some of these flower parts today. The first thing that I usually notice when I am looking at these flowers, either one of them, are, well, two things. I'm sitting here and I notice that they are very fragrant. I can smell, especially this lily, is amazing smell. But also the bright colors. There are some patterns here in the Alstroemeria, and these huge pink leaves. You can see that's bigger than my hand, huge pink petals. All of that serves to attract pollinators. The bees, the butterflies, anything to come and pollinate this flower. Those are the big attractive things we notice first. So I want you to imagine when this flower was still wrapped up very nice and tight in its little bud, and it would need to be protected as it grew, those great attractors, these beautiful petals. And so what you'll find often on the outside of a flower are remnants of the bud, which are the sepals. Down here at the bottom, you can see this Alstroemeria. It extends up through this first row, this first whorl. And normally we might think that those are just petals, but really this is part of what protected that bud as it was growing. So we will call this first layer here that attaches, this first round layer that attaches to the stem here. We would call each of these, and you can definitely see that this is green down here at the bottom, we would call each of these a sepal. Let's see if we can see that. Each of these we would call a sepal. And all of them together, this whole round part at the bottom of this Alstroemeria, this whole green part, which again extends up into the first whorl, we will call the calyx. And it goes all around the bottom, and it's part of the structure that helped to protect this flower when it was still a bud. Now, the lily has the same thing, but they look much more like part of the flower here. So you can see this very first whorl, this outer layer that we will, whoops, let me get that guy out of our way, that we will peel back is, could be called the sepal and the calyx. This first layer coming around. Let me see if I can get it connected. But they look much more, you can see they're green inside. You can imagine what that was like when it was protecting the bud. However, they open up and they're much showier and look much more like the petals. So all of this connected would be called the calyx again. And just one, each part of the calyx, when they're separate, is called a sepal. Okay, so a group, the first whorl that protects the flower bud is called the calyx, and then each one is called a sepal. Now in this second whorl, the second wrapped around this flower here, we are going to find what we always really notice about flowers, what bees notice first, and that is the petal. And you can see that they're a little bit different from that outer whorl, much wider, even a little bit showier. They open up nice and big, and each one of these is called a petal. Okay. What we might not know yet is that all of the petals gathered together have a name, that whole whorl of petals, and all together they are called the corolla. So just one is called a petal, and altogether they're called the corolla. And their job is to attract those pollinators, to get the bees and the butterflies, in some places birds, hummingbirds, maybe flies. I actually just read a really cool article where bats are, certain species of bats are pollinators for certain types of plants. So it's amazing. But the flower has to do this work, the plant has to do this work to attract whatever pollinators they can, and they do that with their petals that make up the corolla. Now in the center of the flower, we have these parts here. And see, everything's a little bit wet or sticky, and that actually is some nectar, which is part of what smells, what gives off that beautiful fragrance. To me, it's beautiful. People like it or don't, but bees seem to like it, and butterflies, and they come and to drink this nectar, to try to drink this nectar from the flower. And so that's another way they attract them. But that is all in the inside of the flower. It's producing, it's a little bit sticky. But these are the other main parts that are inside of the flower. And if you look, you can see there are a bunch of parts that look like this. And there's one center part that looks like this. This is very common in flowers to have many of these, and we'll put the labels out in a second. They're called stamens, and one pistil here in the center. But that's not the only way flowers can be. Some flowers have only stamens or only pistils. Some flowers have one stamen. Some flowers have their stamens all connected to a fan. Some might even have more than one pistil, or it looks like it in the flower. So these come in all different varieties, but this is a very common way to see this. So you will see that the stamens here are connected on the outer. They make kind of a ring here around the outside. I'll see if I can kind of open that up. Okay, all of these stamens go all around the outside here. Okay. And again, all of those are called stamens. And then here, the center part, okay, all the way down to here. Here is where the stem begins. So remember, we had all of our petals and our whole calyx covering that up, where that meets the stem here. But this part is called the pistil. And so again, very common to have many stamens and one pistil in a flower. And down here, these are the main parts of the flower, but I do want to just make a special note. One of the jobs of the flower is to create the seeds, to have a place for the flower, for the plant to create seeds, to make more of itself. And those seeds will happen down here at the bottom of the pistil. There is a place for seeds to grow, and that is called the ovary. And it's the little house for the seeds where the flower will grow its seeds. These are the main parts of most complete flowers. And when you look at your work on Schoology and you either decide to print it out and do the work, do the flower labeling, or if you choose to, you may do that online on one of the Google Docs. The first level flower work looks like this and has a diagram about all these parts we just talked about. So remember, we have the sepal, which is the outer layer. Now on here, it's a more traditional looking, like a green leaves that would have protected the bud. And each sepal, when it is all of the sepals, it had a new name, and that was the calyx. So that was the group of sepals. We also talked about, you guys will recognize on your diagram, the petals and all of the petals together that create the corolla. We have the many stamens is on your diagram and one pistil. And at the bottom of the pistil, where the flower plant will create seeds, is the ovary. So here are your word bank down here, and you'll use those words to fill out your diagram. And if you just want to do the first level of your flower diagram and you're happy with that, then the first level is fine. You may stop there. We, however, are going to take a little bit closer look. We know a lot about the petals and the corolla, and it's easy to notice the calyx and the sepals on the outside of the plant. But we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the stamens and the pistils because they are the parts of the plant that really come together to create those seeds, and we want to look at some of the special features of these plants. So I'm going to move our pistil over here for now, and let's look at these stamens. So if you look here, they're very frequently on a very thin stalk, okay, very thin stalk here, and that is called the filament. Okay, that very, very thin stalk is called the filament. I am just going to take this top off. The word filament is often used to refer to something that is hair-like. So if that helps you to remember, the filament is this very, very thin, hair-like part of the stamen. Okay, so that is the filament. Now, in my hand, you will see that I have, I'm going to try to show you one. Very often it is split into two, like these stamens are stuck together. It is split into two parts. Let's see if I can show that to you. Get it to focus here. It's a little bit blurry, but there are two sides of this top part. It's almost like a little head on there, and this part is called the anther. Anther always reminds me of antlers, like on the top, on the head, they might have antlers, but it's an anther. And that is the tippy top part here of that sits way up on top of the filament, the top part of the stamen, and its job is very cool. If you notice some of this powder coming off, this powder is coming off everywhere, and it is on my fingers, it's everywhere. That is the part of the plant that makes you sneeze in the springtime, but it's also the part of the plant that is created that helps to make the seed, and that is called pollen. And I don't have a good way to label it besides just all of this dust everywhere that is coming off of these anthers. Okay, so the job of the anther is to hold the pollen. Now, if you can imagine, yeah, I've got a whole bunch of pollen on here, you can't even see it. Lilies are pretty notorious for you reach down and you sniff one and your whole nose, the end of your nose, might turn yellow because you reach down and you sniff and you touch this pollen and it comes away and turns your nose to a yellow color because that is sitting right there on the top of the lily. Sometimes for decoration, they will even rinse the pollen off of the lilies before they sell them to customers because that part will make you sneeze. But what happens when a bee comes in, he's attracted by these beautiful, beautiful petals. And so he comes in and he goes, oh, I'm going to drink some lovely nectar. The bee then also bumps into these anthers. And you can see they move around, they sway in the wind. The bee bumps them, and all of this pollen gets collected on the bee's legs and feet. And as he dances around, that pollen actually gets transferred. Remember how the pistil was in the middle of the stamens? Well, check this guy out. If you can see at the top of this pistil, the top here, can you see how it's kind of shiny in the light? It's actually very, very wet and sticky a lot of times. And the bee's dancing around. The bee's got pollen on its feet. And he touches and runs into this top of the pistil here hanging out. And look what happens there. That pollen will stick to the top of this pistil. And I'm going to use, I have a secondary one here that I'm going to break apart a little bit. That sticky, soft, sticky top is called the stigma. And the stigma is the top, sticky opening of the pistil. And it gathers up, just because of the way it is, it gathers up all of that good pollen from the anthers. If you can see in here, it's open underneath. Oh my goodness, my focus. I'm so sorry. You have to get yourself a lily or an alstroemeria and try this out. If we were in the classroom, we would all be dissecting these flowers so that you could see a little bit better. But there is a hole in the center of the stigma, and it leads down to a tube. I think that's one of your questions. There is a tube inside of this long part of, and it's sticky. It's grabbing, it's trying to grab onto that pollen and lead it down, down, down this tube. And I am trying to open it gently here so that you can see this is a hollow tube here going all the way down. And you can't see it, but please trust me, it's a tube. And it comes all the way down, and that is called the style. That's the style part, stylish part. And it leads all the way down to the ovary at the bottom. Okay, that was our thick ovary part. Now, I have another one here that I've already opened up. And because inside, now these aren't ready. These aren't ready at all. But what happens is inside of the ovary are these little teeny tiny, there is no way you're going to be able to see them. I have some right here. I'll try to take some photographs to put up at the end. They're little teeny tiny, oh, right there on the end of my fingernail, little teeny tiny beginnings of seeds called ovules. Ovules are inside of the ovary. Okay, so there's the ovary is the big part at the bottom. We already talked about that. And inside are these little ovules. Now, when the pollen comes down, it gets stuck onto the stigma and it travels down the style, and inside the ovary it meets up with the ovules, and then the pollen and the ovule together are able to develop into the seed. And at that point, the seeds inside expand. The flower petals might start dying off because they finished their job. This ovary is going to expand and try to feed that seed, and often covers the seed in some kind of either a fleshy part like a pea or a bean seed, or some kind of oily fat like inside of a sunflower seed, or possibly even surround it with something like the flesh of a tomato or an apple, just depending on the kind of a plant. So that develops all from this ovary, inside the ovary, inside, deep inside the flower. All of this is going on deep inside of these flowers that are really there. We think of them as there to attract our pollinators, but these flowers have all kinds of stuff going on inside after that happens. It's after the bee visits, the bee gets his nectar, the bee goes ahead back to the hive and leaves behind the pollen, turning into a new seed. So if you are on Schoology and you click on the challenge level, it's a very similar to the first level of your plant parts, but what they've done instead, here this part, which is pointing to the stamen here, the stamens that are surrounding the outside, we know now that the stamen is actually made up of two parts, the filament and the anther, and that on the anther rides some pollen. Now, is it ever really ginormous like that? No, of course not. This is a diagram. But you can see that the stamen is made of two parts and that there's pollen on the top. And that the, pistil is actually made up of three parts, the stigma, the style, and the ovary. Okay, so three parts that make up this pistil, the stigma, the style, and the ovary. And this line is actually pointing inside, all the way inside the ovary, and we remember inside the ovary are the ovules. So it has all the same plant parts that we covered on the first level, and then the challenge parts that are inside, looking deeper into the stamens and the pistil. So I hope that you guys very much enjoyed learning about all the parts of the plant and thinking about all the mysterious parts of the plant that are going on all around us, especially right now that it's the middle of spring. We're getting deeper into spring, and these we can go into our yard and pick almost any flower and identify some of these plant parts. So with parent permission, please do some flower dissections and send me a picture. Hope you guys are doing great. Miss you. Bye.